over to Luis from Mexico.
Hi, good morning. I'm Luis Fernando Garcia. I'm the director of the Digital Rights Defense Network of Mexico, R3D. We are a digital rights organization from Mexico. We use several tools, litigation, research, advocacy, education, communication to advance human rights perspective on digital rights. We believe that technology is a tool for exercise of human rights, and we want it to be like that, and in some occasions to be preserved like that. In Mexico, there are several information controls as the definition given by Citizen Lab is given. On first, I need to. No, I don't need it. First, with regard, I would need to say that the context of Mexico is very important to take into account. Recently, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights and other universal UN special procedures, the Rapporteur on Torture and others, have recognized that Mexico is going through a severe human rights crisis characterized by forced disappearances, torture, extrajudicial killings, and particularly some sectors of the population are particularly targeted, such as journalists and human rights defenders. In Mexico, the line between organized crime and authorities is often non-existent, or at least, in the best case scenario, blurry. Given this into account, just to mention a few, I will focus on one particular information control, but I just want to mention a few. The first one is the violence and intimidation for journalists and for people who express themselves in the internet. There's plenty of documentation about that. The last decade, more than close to 70 journalists, 70 journalists have been killed in Mexico. Many of them which use technology to do their work, the journalistic work. As many have mentioned, the cybersecurity agenda has also gave the entrance to attempts to control the internet. Very recently, cybercrime legislation was introduced into the Senate, and the bill was so badly drafted that literally using a computer was a crime, literally. Fortunately, the people protested in mainly online, which speaks of the importance that online platforms have in Mexico for political participation. And eventually, a week after the senator that proposed the bill proposed it, he retired it. He dismissed his own proposal from the Senate. So it was a little win by the internet, but this cybersecurity agenda is going to continue to come back to our countries, to our doors, to knock our doors. There are other ways in which information is shaped in Mexico. Net neutrality violations. Our organization has a report on that and how companies have violated net neutrality, even though we have a net neutrality law in Mexico. There are other more subtle ways in which governments and companies and influential people are trying to shape information on the internet. For example, manipulation of Twitter algorithms through fake accounts. It's a complicated procedure, but we have some evidence that they're doing this. And also, basically, what I'm going to focus right now is on how information is monitored in Mexico. As Gisela mentioned before, mass surveillance exists in Mexico in the form of data retention provisions. Our organization is challenging the telecommunications law that provides for data retention for 2 years for all metadata of all users of Mexico in an indiscriminate and disproportional way. This includes the origin and destiny of calls or communications, even the location tracking of the devices at all times for 2 years for a person. This reveals a lot of information, sometimes more than the content of the communications. We are challenging this legislation, and it will be decided by the Supreme Court in the following months. If someone wants to know more about it, we can talk about it later. And also the lack of safeguards that exist for the so-called lawful intercept provisions, location tracking of mobile devices, and access to metadata of users. There's, in occasions, not clarity about which authorities can ask for this information. There's no clarity, or there's clarity that they don't need a judicial warrant to get this information. And in general, there's a lack of safeguards, which is very problematic for surveillance, because surveillance is an invasion of a right that the user does, the person affected by that invasion does not know that it's being violated, so you cannot defend yourself. This is why safeguards are so important, because since you cannot defend your right by yourself, you need a judge, you need other bodies and other accountability measures to make sure that these provisions and that these tools that are so invasive and that can lead to more human rights violations, especially in a place in Mexico, in which, as I mentioned, the difference between authorities and organized crime is practically non-existent. This is very, very, very important. But sometimes, and now I turn to my presentation, which, to be honest, it's not a presentation that I did. Hacking Team did it for me. These are slides from a presentation from Hacking Team. So thanks to Hacking Team for doing my presentation today. But suddenly, privacy advocates are dismissed as paranoids and as, oh yeah, it could be abused, but you are being paranoid. So what I'm going to do with the rest of my time, I want to show you how we can prove that Hacking Team software has been purchased illegally, has been used illegally, and has been used for political purposes. So this is Hacking Team's Mexico Inside Strategic Plan. You can find it on the emails that are published by WikiLeaks, for example. First, there's this slide about the Merida Initiative. The Merida Initiative is a security cooperation agreement between the United States government and Mexico, which, I mean, Hacking Team highlights how much money this involves, $2.8 billion, and they want a piece of that. They want a piece of that because this money is basically used to purchase, among other things, surveillance equipment, because the United States believes that giving Mexico authorities this kind of equipment will serve its security interests. I don't know. Ask them why they believe that. But this shows how important the security agenda of the United States is influencing the security agenda that is pushing these information controls in Latin America, and particularly in Mexico. Then Hacking Team shows in this graphic how Mexico is its biggest buyer, more than almost 6 million euros. And that's the best by far. His best client is Mexico. His third individual client that is more profitable is the CISEN, which is like the NSA of Mexico, the intelligence agency of Mexico. Mexico also has the biggest number of clients by Hacking Team, both federal and local authorities. For example, the CISEN, the National Intelligence Agency, and Policía Federal, which are federal bodies, they do have at least they do have legal authorization with all these lack of safeguards, but at least they have a constitutional and legal capability to perform some surveillance, targeted surveillance. But there are other, and most of them, these are just the only two, well, and one more, the last one that says Procuraduría General de la República, which is the authority that investigates federal crimes. Besides those three, most of the rest that I'm going to show you don't even have legal capability to do surveillance. So it's only just the purchase and the use that they do, any use that they do is already illegal. For example, the Mexican Army, which was requesting for equipment to be able to target 600 people at the same time. The same army that has just been shown to commit human rights violations, such as the killings in Tlatlaya, just an execution of almost 20 people. The Navy, which also don't have any authorization in the law to perform surveillance. And most importantly, many local authorities. Here's a map of Mexico, and the ones in gray are its clients. Most of these states, and here you can see in the agency, most of the agencies are Oficina del Gobernador, which is Office of the Governor. So the governors of some local states are purchasing this equipment, and I will point you to another part of this slide where it says partners. Hacking Team and other companies have always said that they only sell this kind of equipment directly to officials that have authorization under the law. This shows, and a lot of other evidence shows, that they are using intermediaries and intermediary companies to sell this equipment. And here is the name of some of them: Sim Servicios, Elite, and others. The states of Puebla, Yucatan, Durango, and Jalisco, and Baja California are purchased by the Office of the Governor, who doesn't have any authorization under the law to do this. In the state of Tamaulipas is the police, which doesn't have any capabilities to do surveillance. In the state of Mexico is the prosecutor. It does have, but that doesn't make it right, but at least it has some authorization under the Constitution to perform this kind of surveillance. And the last one is very weird, which is Pemex, which is a state-owned oil company that is purchasing surveillance malware. A good thing is that even though they have this capability, it hasn't been very efficient. The National Security Agency of Mexico, Intelligence Agency, has not been very effective. Only 2% of the potential volume of the equipment has been used. It has the capability of performing of targeting 1,000 people, and they have only been able to infect successfully 18 people. So at least they're not very good at their job. However, some are good at the job, and they are being successfully targeting political adversaries, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So, sorry. So this is an email, one of the emails that you can see in, or let me go to the email where it's better, probably. So this is an email that you can find in WikiLeaks, and it's one of the customers, the Puebla government, asked Hacking Team to create exploit documents. This is to use a point doc document, just a Word document, as a cover for the infection that will allow the surveillance. So what Puebla did is they send the document that they want